The blue light of the Sronos laboratory pulsed in rhythm with the temporal field generator. Dr. Kieran Hale worked frantically at his terminal, fingers dancing across the holographic interface as he attempted to compress the data package. Outside, the rain battered against the reinforced windows of the underground facility. Each drop seemed to echo the countdown in his mind. "Transmission ready," the system announced in its artificial monotone. "Target coordinates locked." Kieran glanced at the security feed. The corridor outside his lab remained empty, but he knew better than to trust the apparent calm. Time hunters were masters of deception. They could manipulate the very fabric of perception. "Execute transmission," he commanded, voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. The data package, containing 5 years of research on temporal loop mechanics, began its journey across the quantum network. If it reached its destination, it would expose the truth about how the Time Hunters maintained their control over humanity. The transmission bar reached 60% when the first alarm sounded. "Temporal anomaly detected," the system warned. "Chronal signature matches Time Hunter protocols." Kieran cursed under his breath. "Override security protocols. Reroute transmission through secondary channels." His fingers flew across the interface, implementing countermeasures he had prepared for this eventuality. The transmission stuttered, slowed, then resumed at half speed. 80%. The laboratory door hissed open. Captain Selene Torvald stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 Time Hunters in their distinctive mercury-colored uniforms. Their chronometric weapons, designed to freeze a target in a microsecond of perpetual time, were already drawn. "Dr. Hale," Selene said, her voice as cold as the blue light surrounding them. "By the authority of the Temporal Preservation Act, you are under arrest for attempting to disrupt the established timeline." 90%. Kieran reached for the emergency purge button beneath his desk. "I wouldn't," Selene warned, raising her weapon. "Temporal stasis is unpleasant, especially when maintained for extended periods." 95%. The lead hunter fired. Kieran felt the air around him crystallize as the chronometric field enveloped his workspace. The transmission froze at 98%. So close, yet insurmountably far. "Transmission intercepted," Selene announced with satisfaction. "Bring him to the temporal gate. The director wants to question him personally." As the stasis field released him into the hunter's custody, Kieran allowed himself a moment of despair. Years of work, all for nothing. Yet beneath that despair burned a tiny ember of defiance. This was not the end. Somehow, he would find a way to complete his mission. The hunters cuffed him with temporal restraints, devices that slowed his personal time relative to the world around him, making any attempt to escape futile. His movements would be imperceptibly slow to everyone else, while the world would appear to move at impossible speeds from his perspective. "You're wasting your time," Kieran told Selene as they led him from the laboratory. "Even if you stop me, others will discover the truth." Selene's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's the beauty of our work. Doctor, in our hands, time is never wasted. It simply resets." The journey to the temporal gate took hours, though Kieran experienced it as days due to the temporal restraints. The hunters transported him via a private shuttle to the orbital station that housed humanity's first and only temporal displacement facility, a massive ring-shaped structure rotating slowly against the backdrop of Earth. From the shuttle's viewport, Kieran could see the gleaming white surfaces of the temporal gate, its central aperture pulsing with the same blue light as his laboratory. This was where the Time Hunters staged their operations, where they launched their corrections to maintain what they called the proper flow of time. In reality, Kieran knew they were merely preserving their own power. The docking procedure passed in silence. When they disembarked, Colonel Aram Santos awaited them in the arrival bay, a tall, imposing figure with dark eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of potential threats. "Captain Torvald," Santos acknowledged with a curt nod. "I see you've retrieved our temporal dissident." "As ordered." "Colonel," Cellini replied. Dr. Hale was attempting to transmit restricted research. Santos studied Kieran with surprising intensity. "Was he, indeed? And what was so important that you risked everything, Doctor?" Kieran met his gaze. "The truth about the loops, about how you're keeping humanity trapped in cycles of repeated time to maintain control." "Take him to detention cell 17, Santos commanded, seemingly uninterested in Kieran's accusation. "I want a full chronometric scan. Find out if he's implanted any temporal markers in his own timeline." The guards marched Kieran through the sterile corridors of the temporal gate. Other personnel they passed barely glanced at the prisoner. Detentions were common enough to have become unremarkable. Cell 17 was a small, hexagonal room with walls of polished white composite, no visible seams, no obvious door once it closed behind him. The temporal restraints were removed. But Kieran knew better than to think this meant freedom. The entire cell functioned as a temporal isolation chamber. Left alone, he sat on the room's single bench and closed his eyes, reviewing the events that had led to his capture. He had been so careful, maintaining the appearance of a loyal researcher while secretly documenting the Time Hunter's manipulation of the timeline. For 5 years, he had gathered evidence of how they selectively reset events that threatened their authority, trapping witnesses in micro-loops that erased their memories. But something had gone wrong. They had been waiting for him, as if they knew exactly when he would attempt to transmit his findings. Unless... A chill ran down his spine. What if they had reset this very sequence? What if he had already been captured before? Had already tried to escape, and they had simply wound back time to prevent his success? The cell door whispered open, interrupting his thoughts. A technician entered, accompanied by 2 guards. The technician carried a chronometric scanner, a device resembling an ancient stethoscope connected to a holographic display. "Remove your shirt, please," the technician instructed without preamble. Kieran complied, watching as the scanner was pressed against his chest, then moved methodically across his body. "Interesting," the technician murmured, studying the readout. "He's experienced at least 3 micro-resets in the past week." One of the guards frowned. "That's impossible. We haven't authorized any operations involving him until today." "Perhaps an echo from a tangential timeline," the technician suggested. "It happens sometimes with physicists who work closely with temporal fields." They completed the scan in silence, then left him alone once more. But their words had confirmed Kieran's suspicion. He had been caught in a loop, possibly multiple loops, and his memory had been selectively preserved or erased according to the hunter's needs. Hours passed. Kieran paced the small cell, trying to formulate a plan with too few variables. Without access to equipment or data, he was blind, helpless. The door opened again. This time, Captain Celine entered alone. "Comfortable, Doctor?" she asked, though her tone suggested she cared little for his answer. "Hardly," Kieran replied, "but I suspect comfort isn't the point." "Quite right." She produced a small device from her pocket, a temporal marker, used to tag specific moments in time for later reference or manipulation. "Do you know what this is?" "Of course. We found 3 similar markers embedded in your personal timeline. Care to explain how they got there?" Kieran kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. He had never implanted himself with markers. Such a procedure required specialized equipment he didn't have access to. "I can't explain what I didn't do," he said carefully. Seleni's eyes narrowed. Someone marked you. Dr. Hale, someone with access to our technology. I want to know who your accomplice is. I work alone. Nobody works alone. She activated the marker, and it pulsed with blue light. Especially not when dealing with time. She placed the marker on the bench beside him. Think about your answer. The director will arrive tomorrow, and he's far less patient than I am. After she left, Kieran examined the marker without touching it. It was standard Hunter technology, used to create anchor points in the timeline. With enough markers and the right equipment, one could theoretically create a stable loop independent of the Hunter's control. But who would mark him without his knowledge, and why? Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams fragmented by images of blue light and endless corridors. When he awoke, the marker was gone from the bench, though he was certain he hadn't touched it. The door opened shortly after. Instead of Celine or the guards, a woman in a technician's uniform entered. She moved directly to the corner of the cell where a small ventilation panel was located, her back to the surveillance systems. "Don't react," she whispered, her fingers working at the panel. "My name is Lila Rousseau. I'm a chronal engineer. You don't know me, but I've been helping you across several loops." Kieran maintained his position on the bench, keeping his expression neutral. "Prove it. The markers in your timeline weren't planted by the Hunters. You put them there, or rather, you will. A future version of you has been working back through the loops, preparing for something big." She removed the ventilation panel and reached into the space behind it, extracting a small device no larger than a coin. "This is a temporal transmitter. It can send messages across your own timeline. Your future self sent it back for you to find." She slid the device under the bench with a subtle movement. "They'll transfer you to the central facility tomorrow. That's your window." Before Kieran could ask more questions, the door opened again. Colonel Santos stood there, his expression unreadable. "Engineer Rousseau," he said flatly, "your authorization to access this cell expired 20 minutes ago." Lila straightened, her face professionally blank. "Apologies, Colonel. The environmental systems showed anomalies. I was conducting a standard check." Santos stepped aside. "You're done now." After she left, Santos regarded Kieran with that same intense scrutiny he had shown upon their arrival. "Captain Torvald believes you're part of a conspiracy to undermine the temporal authority," he said. "I find that interesting, considering your isolation at the Kronos laboratory. Perhaps she's seeing conspiracies where there are only concerned citizens," Kieran suggested. Santos almost smiled. "Perhaps. Or perhaps there are conspiracies she hasn't even begun to imagine." He tapped a command into his wrist unit. "Your transfer has been moved up. Be ready in 1 hour. Once alone." Kieran waited several minutes before retrieving the hidden transmitter. The device was unlike any technology he had seen before, more advanced than even the Hunter's equipment. Its surface bore no markings except a single instruction etched in microscopic text. "Trust yourself." Kieran activated the transmitter. A holographic interface appeared, displaying a simple message system. There was only one message in the queue, sent from an unspecified point in his future. "When they move you, surrender completely. The loop depends on your capture. I will find you inside. K." The message was signed with his own initial. His future self had somehow traveled back, leaving breadcrumbs for him to follow. But to what end? The transfer came precisely 1 hour later. 4 guards escorted him from the cell, through the labyrinthine corridors of the temporal gate, toward the central facility where the actual gate mechanism was housed. Kieran memorized the route, noting security checkpoints and potential escape routes out of habit, though the message suggested escape wasn't the plan. The central facility was a vast, circular chamber dominated by the temporal gate itself, a 30-meter ring of pulsing blue energy suspended over a bottomless shaft. The energy field within the ring rippled like water, displaying occasional glimpses of other times, other places. Captain Cellini awaited him on the observation platform, alongside a tall, gaunt man Kieran recognized from public broadcasts as the director of the Temporal Authority. Dr. Hale. The director greeted him, voice resonant with artificial modulation. Your work has been of great interest to us. I'm flattered, Kieran replied dryly. Don't be. Interest doesn't equate to approval. The director gestured toward the gate. Do you know what happens to those who threaten the stability of the timeline? I imagine you're about to tell me. They experience firsthand the consequences of temporal disruption. The director nodded to Celine. Prepare him for temporal displacement. Cellini approached with a device resembling handcuffs, but far more complex. These are displacement shackles. They'll ensure you arrive at your destination, mostly intact. As she secured the shackles around his wrists, Kieran noticed something odd, a subtle change in the room's lighting, a barely perceptible shift in the gate's energy pattern. He looked up and saw a figure on the upper maintenance walkway, a figure that looked remarkably like himself. Understanding dawned. His future self wasn't just sending messages back, he was physically here. Celine activated the shackles. Pain shot through Kieran's arms as the devices synchronized with his biological rhythms. Target coordinates set for Temporal Isolation Zone 9, she announced. Preparing for displacement, the guards moved Kieran toward the gate's edge. The blue energy field intensified, reaching tendrils toward him like a living entity hungry for contact. This was it, the moment his message had prepared him for. Any last words, Doctor? The director asked. Kieran looked directly at the figure on the walkway above, at himself, and nodded almost imperceptibly. Time isn't as linear as you think, he said. At that precise moment, chaos erupted. The lights throughout the facility flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness, except for the gate's blue glow. Alarms blared, and emergency systems engaged. From the upper walkway, the future Kieran fired a photon disruptor, a weapon designed specifically to counter chronometric technology. The beam struck the control console, creating a cascade of system failures. Celine reacted instantly, drawing her weapon and firing toward the walkway. The future Kieran ducked behind a support beam, returning fire with precision. In the confusion, Colonel Santos appeared beside Kieran, removing a security key from his uniform. Your future self was right about you, Santos said quickly, unlocking the displacement shackles. You really do surrender convincingly. You're working with him? Kieran asked, bewildered. For 3 loops now, Santos confirmed. He arrived 6 months ago, proved his identity, and showed me what the hunters really do with their corrections. The shackles fell away. Santos pressed a chronal unlocking device into Kieran's hand. The northeast emergency exit. Your other self will meet you there. Celine spotted them through the chaos. Santos, you traitor! Santos pushed Kieran toward the exit. Go, I'll hold them off. Kieran ran, using the chronal device to bypass security locks. Behind him, he heard energy weapons discharging, voices shouting commands. The entire facility had descended into pandemonium, exactly as planned. He realized the northeast emergency exit led to a maintenance shuttle bay. As he entered, the door sealed behind him, and he came face to face with himself. The future Kieran was older by perhaps 5 years, with a scar running along his jawline and eyes that had seen too much. He wore the uniform of a time hunter, modified with equipment of his own design. "Right on schedule," the future Kieran said, his voice identical yet somehow harder than Kieran's own. "We don't have much time before they restore the systems." "You're really me," Kieran stated, the reality of temporal manipulation suddenly concrete before him. "I'm you after living through this loop 17 times. His future self confirmed. "Each time, I've made small adjustments, placed the markers in our timeline, recruited allies like Santos and Lila." "For what purpose?" The future Kieran activated a holographic display on his wrist unit. It showed the temporal gate's internal systems. "The hunters don't just preserve the timeline, they manipulate it to maintain power. They've trapped humanity in a series of controlled loops, erasing any progress toward true temporal freedom. But their system has a flaw." He pointed to a subsystem labeled Memory Retention Protocol. "When they reset a loop, they use this to preserve their own memories while erasing everyone else's. I've spent 17 loops sabotaging it incrementally. Today, when they try to reset after our attack, the protocol will fail." Kieran understood immediately. "Everyone will remember. The truth will be exposed." "Exactly. But for that to happen, you need to complete the loop that creates me." His future self handed him a data crystal. "This contains everything, records of their manipulations, instructions for the next 5 years, and the technology you'll need to develop to return to this moment." "You want me to become you?" Kieran realized. "I am you. You are me. We're the same consciousness experiencing different points in a closed temporal circuit." The future Kieran checked his chronometer. "They'll reset in approximately 3 minutes. When they do, you'll wake up in your laboratory 3 days ago, with no memory of this encounter." "Then how will I know what to do?" "The crystal contains a subconscious imprinting program. While you sleep tonight, it will embed the essential information deep enough that the reset won't erase it." He gripped Kieran's shoulder. "Trust yourself, even when the path seems unclear." The facility shuddered as emergency power fluctuated. The future Kieran moved toward the shuttle controls. "What happens to you when the loop resets?" Kieran asked. His future self smiled sadly. "This version of me stops existing. But if you succeed, a new timeline branches where none of this is necessary." "And Santos? Lila?" "Santos dies in every loop. It's unavoidable. His sacrifice creates the distraction that allows us this moment. Lila survives but is captured. In the new timeline, they'll both be free." The lights flickered again, more violently. The chronometer on the future Kieran's wrist began pulsing with urgent red light. "Reset imminent," he warned. 1 minute. Take the crystal. When you wake, you'll feel compelled to check the false bottom of your desk drawer. The rest will unfold from there." Kieran took the crystal, feeling its weight, the weight of 5 years of struggle and sacrifice. "Why did you mark my timeline?" he asked, suddenly remembering Seleni's interrogation. "The markers are anchors that help maintain memory integrity across resets. I placed them during my journey back through the loops." A bitter smile. "The hunters found them, of course, but that was part of the plan. Their investigation led them exactly where I wanted." The facility's systems began to whine as power surged through overtaxed circuits. The temporal gate was preparing for a massive reset. 30 seconds. The future Kieran announced. "Remember, when you wake, check the drawer. Trust yourself. And whatever happens, ensure your transmission reaches 98% before they capture you." 98? Why not complete it? Because at 98%, They take you to the temporal gate instead of simply erasing your work. That's the fulcrum point of the entire plan. The air around them began to shimmer with blue energy as the reset field expanded from the central facility. "It's starting," the future Kieran said. "Good luck, though technically, I already know you succeed." The blue light engulfed them, and the world dissolved into quantum particles. Kieran Hale awoke with a start, his heart pounding. He was in his bedroom at the Kronos Laboratory residential complex. Outside, rain battered against the windows, the same storm that had been raging for days. For a moment, he lay still, trying to capture the fragments of a dream already fading from his consciousness. Something about time, about loops and betrayal and himself. A compelling urge drew him from his bed to his desk, without understanding why. He felt for the false bottom in the top drawer, a hiding place he hadn't used or even thought about in months. His fingers found the latch and lifted the panel. Inside lay a data crystal he had no memory of placing there. As he held it up to the dim light, memories not yet experienced whispered at the edges of his mind. A plan was unfolding, had unfolded, would unfold, across time, across multiple versions of himself. He inserted the crystal into his personal terminal. A single text file opened automatically. The transmission must reach exactly 98%, not more, not less. Everything depends on this. Kieran didn't understand. Not yet. But deep in his subconscious, the seeds planted by his future self began to germinate. He would understand when the time came. 3 days later, as he worked frantically to compress his data package while rain battered against the laboratory windows, a sense of déjà vu swept over him. He had done this before, would do it again. The transmission bar reached 60% when the first alarm sounded. Temporal anomaly detected. The system warned. Chronal signature matches Time Hunter protocols. Kieran smiled faintly. Right on schedule. The cycle continued. His capture, the journey to the temporal gate, the interrogation. But this time, as Lila Rousseau slipped him the transmitter, he already knew what message he would find. This time, when he saw his future self on the walkway above the gate, he recognized the culmination of a plan set in motion across multiple timelines. And when the reset came, he awoke not in his bedroom, but in his laboratory chair, the data package still on his screen, incomplete at 98%. But something was different. The facility was silent, no alarms, no hunters breaking down his door. His terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Colonel Santos, a man who, in another timeline, had died for a cause he barely understood. Reset protocol failed, memory retention widespread, time hunters in disarray. Proceed with transmission completion. Kieran looked at the transmission bar, still frozen at 98%. With a single command, he could finish what he had started across multiple loops of time. His finger hovered over the execute button. In this moment, balanced between past and future, he thought of all the versions of himself who had lived and died to create this opportunity, of Santos and Lila and countless others trapped in the hunter's manipulated reality. He pressed the button. Transmission complete. The system announced, data package delivered. Across the world, across the solar system and its colonies, people began to remember. Time hunters frozen in mid-action as their authority crumbled. The director, for the first time in centuries, faced with a reality he could not simply erase and rewrite. In his laboratory, Kieran Hale activated the recording system. Future generations would need to understand what had happened, how humanity had been freed from temporal manipulation. My name is Dr. Kieran Hale, he began, and this is the story of how I surrendered to the Time Hunters, so that my future self could ambush them from within the loop. Outside, the rain had stopped. A new timeline was beginning, one without predestined loops or manipulated memories. A timeline where humanity could write its own future. But as Kieran recorded his testimony, a small anomaly appeared on his temporal scanner, a tiny fluctuation in the quantum field, too small to trigger alarms, but large enough to suggest that somewhere, somewhen, the Time Hunters might have one last card to play. The recording continued. The future remained unwritten. And time, for once, moved forward without repetition.